Dorothy Sayers, who was a Christian author of the last century, in her observation of the American church, had this critique about the American church's disconnect from what she calls a secular vocation. And here's what she had to say. She said, "Nothing has the church so lost her hold on reality as in her failure to understand and respect the secular vocation. She has allowed work and religion to become separate departments and is astonished to find that as a result, the secular work of the world is turned to purely selfish and destructive ends, and that the greater part of the world's intelligent workers have become irreligious or at least uninterested in religion. But is it astonishing? How can anyone remain interested in a religion which seems to have no concern with 9/10 of his life?" Now, I think her frustration is well-founded because it reflects a profound truth that's found in Scripture. Simply that God cares deeply about our work and our vocation. And today's passage that comes from Ephesians chapter 6 highlights that reality. And if I were to boil down everything that I want to say today into one statement, I think this would be it. That your work matters to God, and that God matters to your work. And we're going to see this idea play out in our text by observing two things. One, we're going to see that Christianity values your work. And secondly, we're going to see how Christianity provides new motivation for your work. How Christianity values your work and how it provides new motivation for your work. So first, the value of your work. Now, as we get deeper into the passage, I feel the need to clear up something first. Because the unfortunate reality is that this very passage has been used in the past to justify chattel slavery in American history. And they get this from the word that starts with bondservant. Now, bondservant, this particular translation that was read for you kind of tries to side-skirt this issue with interpretation by using the word bondservant. But most other English translations would translate the word doulos as slaves. And so a lot of folks would look at a passage like this and say, look, the passage isn't even trying to abolish slavery, but in fact, it encourages slaves to obey their masters. Isn't this problematic? I think if you were to look at biblical scholars and historians, they would say that in order for you to understand this passage rightly, you need to first understand the difference between first century slavery and American chattel slavery. Because there is a clear difference between the two. Because first century slavery was certainly not based on race. It was not permanent. It had term limits to the person's labor. And lastly, it was not a result of intentional human trafficking where a group of people would go to these other regions, round whole people groups up, and bring them back to use them as slaves. A lot of them were hired themselves out as indentured servants due to their financial circumstances, and some of them were prisoners of war that were fought, who were brought back and were given all kinds of jobs throughout society. So in fact, historians would say that if you were an everyday person in the first century, in the Roman Empire, you would have a very difficult time distinguishing who was a freed person and who was a slave. Now, be that as it may, what is true is that most of these slaves were involved in menial and basic work. Like they worked in the janitorial services, or they performed kind of basic level administrative duties around the household, right? They worked the kinds of work that were often overlooked by society. Now, part of the reason why I'm giving you this historical context is because this context actually helps us to see Paul's radical claim. And here's what I mean by that. and talking about the Christian understanding of work and encouraging workers to think through the lens of faith, their vocation, who does Paul address first? He doesn't address first the executives in the community. He does not address the managers in that community. He addresses first the slaves. He addresses them directly in verses 6 to 7 and says, look, your work, no matter how menial it may be, no matter how much you think it is a drudgery, your work is the will of God or the calling of God upon your life. And you would say that calling is what makes your work valuable. It is worth thinking through your work through the lens of faith, he would say, no matter how menial your work may be. Now, this passage then is taking direct aim at our hierarchical view of work, isn't it? So we have this cultural tendency even now to rank jobs, don't we? Based on income, status, or education. You know, having worked with many married couples over the years and helping them work through various conflicts, I often see this subtle but real power play that happens in marriage relationships. And it often happens according to what they see as more valuable work to get an edge over one another. And most of the time, it's over who brings the greater share of the income. Or if one of the spouses isn't working, it's who is the breadwinner of the family. But today's passage tells us that that is a worldly view of work, because it tells us that your work isn't justified based on how it's ranked on a societal scale, but based on the God who has called you to the work that you are engaged in. Now, there are several implications to this. Let me highlight just a few of them. One, if you were to understand this passage well, first, it means that you dare not look down on anybody according to their vocation. I once heard a pastor mentor who's pastored a lot of people for many years tell me, you know, if you want to get real insight into someone's character, you take them to a restaurant, he said. And at the restaurant, watch how they treat the service staff. Is there interaction with the service staff based on respect and dignity? Do they look them in the eyes, show appreciation? Or is it purely transactional? You know, them being polite to you is a given, but you need not reciprocate necessarily. I'll tell you, after I heard that, I'm like, I'm never tipping the same way again. I'm going to be generous. It's because the Bible respects all forms of work. So whether you feel like you're stuck in your job, you're not really going anywhere, and you're asking yourself, like, what the heck am I doing here? Punching in and punching out. Or you're at the top of your field. You've achieved everything that you wanted to achieve, and the kind of work that you are doing right now is what you imagined many years ago when you started out in your career. But it's not giving you the satisfaction you thought it would, and you're asking, is this all there is to it? God sees all of it and says your work is valuable as long as you are posted there. That is where the value of our work comes from. But here's what this also means. It means that Christian faith then does have something to do with what you spend the majority of your waking hours doing. Your work. And Christian growth, it also means then, happens in seeing your work as a calling from God. That also means your Christian growth happens during the thing that you spend most of your waking hours doing. It is not removed from that arena. We have a member at our church that I had the pleasure of walking with. This person received a call from God to start a business. And it's been super inspirational for me to kind of talk to this person about it, because when it comes to his business, I can see that this person has been soaked with prayer. And this person is approaching his business with a kind of desperate dependence on God, but at the same time, what is so attractive is that there is a joyful surrender of the outcome of the business onto God. And I remember thinking, man, like I wish as a pastor, I wish I had that level of intentionality with my work. And it would be my dream for every single one of us here in all of the work, whether it's paid, unpaid, whether it's in the home or in the office, for us to take that level of intentionality into our work, knowing that our labors are valuable in the sight of God because He has called us to it. Your work has immense value. But with that said, here's the reality, right? Just knowing that your work is valuable isn't always enough, is it? Because that's all fine. But what gets you out of bed on the hard days and into work? What's going to keep you going when you feel unappreciated or you feel burnt out? I believe this is where Christianity offers something that no other worldview can. And it's a new motivation for your work. And so that's the second point, motivation for work. Now, I have to say, for most of us that are still kind of climbing the ladder in our career, if you will, or have urgent and immediate demands on us, I'm not sure if there's a lot of kind of sitting back and assessing motives and asking big questions about our work that's going on, right? We're too busy to do that. You have a deadline that you have to meet that was given to you by your supervisor, or you have, if you're in the home taking care of children, you have little children that are clinging onto you and have all these immediate and urgent needs, and you're like, I ain't got no time for any of that. But what I've seen over the years is that especially as we get near the top of our fields, we find ourselves asking, wait, I ran so hard for so long, but why am I doing this in the first place? And I find that with a lot of people in this stage, this is when disenchantment towards work comes in. And this, to kind of compensate for the lack of fulfillment that they're getting at work, they start giving more towards charity. And a lot of times folks start turning, if they're religious, to the church, right? Wanting to accomplish great things through the church as an avenue of the calling that they feel like God may be giving to them. And if you're in this latter category, let me just say, that impulse is good. And it's certainly good for the church, for you to be giving of so much of your time and your effort and your finances and that kind of a thing. And we want to accomplish great things as a church. But this is where my heart is, and this is where the passage is looking to turn that impulse back towards your work. Look at this passage. If you look at verse 6, it says that if you are a bondservant, if you are a slave, know that you may have an earthly master, but you're ultimately serving Christ. But if you also go down to verse 9, it says, if you are a master, you're an employer, you ultimately also have to answer to Christ. And the obvious implication here is that whether you're a bondservant or a master, your ultimate supervisor is Christ. So he's saying it's not only God who calls you to your work, it's God to whom you're ultimately held accountable for your work. He is the one who ultimately drives your work. And for those of you that are like, I have done enough with my job and I want to do these other things in these ways, God will look at you and say, I have not allowed you to leave your post. I'm looking to accomplish great things in and through you, through your workplace. Now, whatever drives us in our work is ultimately our boss, right? For some of us, that might be our literal boss. Others of us, it might be your clients that you work with, and you do everything in your workday to try and please them, give them good results. Or it might be your family. If it's in the home, you take care of the immediate needs of your family, or if you're out of the home, you work hard so that you can provide for them. But if you're to think more deeply, like it might get a little bit esoteric, right? You may say, wow, I'm really deriving a sense of identity that comes from having this prestigious job or my place in the company, so on and so forth. But Jesus would say, all of that is fine. But Jesus would say, I am to be your ultimate boss and the primary driving motivation for your work. Now, we're going to get to how that happens in a moment, but if that was true, it would change at least two things. First, it would change how you show up to work. How you show up to work, right? Because so much of how we show up to work depends on whom we serve, right? If our driving motivation is to make money, on the one hand, you may underwork, right? I'll do just enough to get a paycheck so I can get out of here. On the other hand, you might overwork if there's an incentive for you to do so, to get a raise and a bonus and that kind of a thing. And you work yourself into the ground, never keeping Sabbath, never making time for relationships. Or you might approach work in a way that may be unethical. You might cut corners here and there to save costs, or put up with unethical business practices and that kind of a thing. But what if you checked in with your ultimate supervisor every morning before work and asked, Lord, what is your assignment for me this morning? How do you want me to show up today? How would that change your work ethic when no one's looking over your shoulder? How would that shape the way you interact with your colleagues, your supervisor, or those that report to you? Or, this is the most exciting bit for me. How would this change your perspective on what's possible in your work? If you were to check in every morning with the most powerful, creative force in the entire universe who brought the galaxies into being, and if you were to check in with this supervisor, say, how do you want me to show up to work this morning? There's nothing that would be impossible with God in your work. Friends, I want you to try this out this week. Before you step into your office, opening up your laptop or, however way your workday starts, I want you to spend a quiet moment of prayer. Now, later on this week, I'll send out via email a list of prayers that you can pray, but this is just one of them. What if you prayed something like this? You say, gracious God, as I step into a new workday, I seek your guidance and direction. Open my mind to new ideas, insights, and opportunities. Lead me in the paths of righteousness and help me make choices that align with your will. How would that change how you show up to work? If you checked in with God every morning. It would change how you show up to work. But secondly, it would also change who you are at work. Here's what I mean by that. In this book called Chief Joy Officer, title's kind of cheesy, but it's an excellent book. Author Rich Sheridan makes a distinction between a boss and a leader. And he basically says a boss is someone who has authority, and a leader is someone who has influence. The two may overlap, but not always. And here's how he describes a good leader. It's one of my favorite descriptions of a leader from secular literature. He says, good leaders are selfless, though they aren't martyrs. They pitch in where needed and don't see any work as beneath them. They're not afraid of hard work and comfortable letting others around them lead. They don't shy away from conflict, but they don't fan the flames either. Good leaders inspire others, see the positive in situations and people. They enjoy working through difficult problems without needing to be the hero. Things go better when they are around, and it's not always exactly obvious why that is. And lastly, they attract followers who want to be like them. I think one of the reasons why I love this description is because it combines traits that are often not found together. Have you caught that? A good leader is selfless yet strong, humble yet courageous. Someone who makes things better just by being there but doesn't need to make a big show of it and be the hero. You know what he did? He just combined the best traits of somebody who likes taking charge, the alpha type, and someone who follows, the beta type, together as one. And friends, this is the kind of leader God will make out of you if you understand that no matter where you are, positionally in society or at work, that you have an ultimate master over you. And friends, this is exactly the kind of leader that Jesus Christ is. And the more you follow Jesus in your work, the more of a leader he will make you to be, regardless of what position you might hold. Listen to this, that comes from Hebrews 12, 1-2. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Excuse me. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. What is this passage telling us about Jesus, the leader? On the one hand, he has traits of a fantastic follower. Look at the way in which he perfectly and completely submits to the will of the Father in going to the cross, enduring the cross. On the other hand, he has traits of somebody who is perfectly in charge. It says he's the founder. The Greek word there is archegos. Other way that you can translate this word is as champion, or as someone who goes ahead. Right? He is the champion, the charger of our faith, who's now seated at the right hand of God, ordering the affairs of the universe. Looking to Jesus. And if you were to follow Jesus into your work, he will make you into a leader like him. One who has humility, has the humility of a follower, and yet the audacity, the boldness, and the courage of a champion. That's who you will be at work if you were to allow Jesus into your workplace. Now, how does Jesus motivate us to be like him? That's the last thing that I want to look at. Look at what Jesus' motivation was. Why did he do all this? Why did he endure the cross? It tells us it was for the joy that was set before him. In all of his agony and in all of his pain and all of his suffering, the undergirding, the fuel for his work was joy. And that joy is what he wants to give to us. And more specifically, when it comes to his motivation, was the joy that was set before him. What was the joy that was set before him? It was the glory of God, but also the salvation of his people, the one thing that he did not have. Do you realize that in all of his labors, Jesus' joy was over you? And when you understand that Jesus' motivation for work was his joy over you, that's when your motivation for your work becomes the joy over him. Friends, this is where, when we talk about Jesus being the ultimate master, Jesus is distinct from every other supervisor you're going to have. Because where else are you going to find a master who sings over you in love? Though he owned everything, gave everything up, and became a slave to serve you. And whenever he calls you into the work that he assigns you, he said, this is for your joy and for my glory. And I'm going to make sure, by the way, to not leave you alone in your work so that it's all done in labor, painstaking labor, but I'm going to send you your Holy Spirit, send you the Holy Spirit to empower you for every good work that I have called you to do. What kind of master is this? I'll tell you what kind of master this is. This is a kind of master, right, if you were to give your life to him, and if you were to work for him, will fill your life with meaning, with purpose, fulfillment, and joy. Friends, here's what I want you to see. I want you to see the possibilities with your work. Remember, we started with Dorothy Sayers' comment about how the church has separated faith from work. What if all of that could change? Starting right here with every single one of you gathered here in this room, because every single one of you are working during your day. What if your work became a place where God's kingdom breaks in? What if your workplace is a place where human flourishing happens? What if your workplace became a place where the gospel is seen in the way that you show up to work and the kind of leader that you are at work and resembling that of Jesus Christ? Friends, I know I say this a lot, and I really do believe this, that our church can change the world. But I don't want you to misunderstand me when I say that. I really do think us as an institution, as a church, can do a lot of great things. There's no doubt about that. But what really stokes the fire in my heart is when I imagine every single one of you in the places that God has called you to work, inviting Jesus, not just into your private heart, but inviting him into those places. And as you do so, as you check in with your ultimate supervisor every single morning before you dedicate your work unto him, what I firmly believe is that God will bring about a work that is unimaginable to our tiny little imaginations in the here and now. And I do believe that God will change entire industries based on the small acts of obedience and dedication and surrender that we give unto God. And we say, God, what is your assignment for us? And as we change the world, your hearts will be filled with the joy of a God who sings over you, the one who ran the race for you, the one who went to the cross for you, and joyfully calls you into partnership with him as he looks to renew the world through your work. May the Lord bless you as you go into your Monday with the task that he has given to you. Let's pray.